The Ramirez family Christmas dinner was always a spectacle of wealth, or at least the illusion of it. This year, my older brother Daniel had gone all out, hosting in his brand new Scottsdale estate, a glass and steel monstrosity he'd financed entirely on credit that, unbeknownst to him, my company now controlled. I parked my sensible sedan at the far end of the circular driveway, weaving through a parade of imported cars gleaming under the Arona sunset. My coat was off the rack, my shoes scuffed from the office. To them, I was still the practical one, the one who never quite made it. Daniel met me at the door, his grin as smug as the Rolex flashing on his wrist. "Lena," he said, stretching my name like taffy. His eyes dropped to the plain brown packages in my arms. "Homemade gifts again. Some things never change." I smiled, though my fingers itched for the phone in my bag, the one lighting up with alerts that would change everything. As CEO of Horizon Capital Partners, one of the fastest-growing private equity firms in the country, I had spent the past 18 months quietly buying out the debt of every family member who ever mocked my so-called modest life. "You know me," I said mildly, stepping into the cathedral-like foyer. "Always keeping things simple." Simple was not a word in my sister-in-law Jessica's vocabulary. She appeared in a swirl of silk and sequins, dripping in designer labels I recognized instantly because every purchase she'd made this year had gone through credit cards my subsidiaries managed. "Oh, how creative," she said, her eyes sliding over my unassuming packages with thinly veiled disdain. "We went with Prada this year, for everyone." "Of course you did," I murmured, tucking my gifts beneath a tree that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. Gold ornaments, imported glass, twinkling lights timed to a Spotify playlist. From the dining room, laughter rolled like thunder. My mother bustled over, cheeks flushed from expensive wine Daniel couldn't actually afford. "Darling," she said, patting my arm, "you really should let your brother's financial advisor help you with investments. Living in that tiny apartment, driving that old car, it's just not appropriate for a Ramirez." If she only knew. The tiny apartment was one of 7 properties I owned outright, all leased to long-term tenants. The old car was one of dozens in Horizon's corporate fleet. For years, I had cultivated this image of modest means, all while building an empire that now held the strings of everyone in this room. Speaking of finances, Daniel's voice cut through the chatter as he clinked a crystal glass. "Who's ready for the gift exchange? Jessica and I really outdid ourselves this year." I watched as they handed out their glossy, ribbon-wrapped boxes, each one bought with credit they no longer truly owned. Through a delicate web of acquisitions, Horizon Capital had become the majority holder of their mortgages, car loans, and credit lines. "Your turn, Lena," Jessica said with syrupy sweetness. "What did you manage to create this year?" I handed out my packages one by one. Inside each was a handcrafted leather photo album, filled with carefully curated family memories. But tucked into the final pages, hidden beneath snapshots of smiling faces, was something far more revealing: their most recent credit statements, annotated in neat red ink to show exactly who owned their debt. "Oh," Mom said, forcing a bright smile as she flipped through hers. "Another album. How thoughtful." Daniel didn't even open his. He smirked over his champagne glass. "Maybe next year you can afford real presents, sis. My financial advisor could help you understand basic investment strategies." That was when I slipped my phone from my bag and opened the Horizon control dashboard. The alerts were ready. With one tap, every credit card, every loan, every line of credit they had would freeze in an instant. I looked around the table. At the designer dresses, the luxury watches, the brittle confidence, and smiled. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said softly and pressed the button. The room hummed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the glow of twinkling lights for exactly 3 more seconds. Then, one by one, their phones lit up. Notifications flashed. Cards declined. Accounts locked. Jessica's laugh faltered first. Daniel frowned at his phone, confusion creasing his forehead. My mother's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the silence that followed. It was the sound of illusions shattering. I checked my phone again. Everything was in place. Actually, I said quietly, swirling the untouched champagne in my glass, why don't we talk about financial strategies right now? The laughter around the Ramirez family table came to an abrupt halt. Then Daniel, my golden boy, older brother, snorted. Please, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. What would you know about finance? You work at some tiny consulting firm. You don't even own a decent car. I smiled faintly, thumb hovering over the screen. True, I murmured. Then I pressed the alert confirmation. Across the sprawling dining room of Daniel's Scottsdale mansion, phones began buzzing. At first it was background noise, like a hive of bees. Then confusion flickered across their faces as they checked the notifications. Odd, I said, my voice calm against the rising tension. You might want to check those messages. The scene unfolded exactly as I'd planned. Jessica, my sister-in-law and self-proclaimed style queen, was the first to react. Her face blanched as she tapped frantically at her phone. There must be some mistake, she stammered. All my cards are showing as frozen. Daniel frowned, pulling out his sleek leather wallet and rifling through his collection of platinum and black cards. Mine too, he muttered. Must be a system glitch. I'll call the bank, Jessica said, voice pitching higher with panic. Which bank? I asked sweetly, resting my chin on one hand. Meridian Trust? Atlantic Federal? Or maybe Premier Credit? I let the silence stretch, watching realization creep into their carefully contoured expressions. They all report, I continued softly, to Horizon Capital Partners, now. Mom's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Her eyes darted to me, searching my face for any hint of a joke. Horizon, she whispered. But that's one of the largest private equity firms in the country. Yes, I agreed, finally dropping the modest facade I'd worn for years like a second skin. And I'm its CEO and majority shareholder. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the expensive Christmas playlist piping through Daniel's state-of-the-art Sonos system seemed to falter. That's impossible, Daniel said at last, his voice cracking slightly. You run a small consulting business. You live in a one-bedroom apartment. Do I? I pulled my tablet from my bag and tapped the screen. A sleek corporate chart glowed under the chandelier's light. That consulting business was just a cover. And that one-bedroom apartment? It's the entire penthouse floor of a building I own downtown. Jessica had gone from pale to an alarming shade of green. But our mortgage is held by Horizon Financial, I said, scrolling with one finger, along with your car loans, your credit cards, and that impressive line of credit you used to furnish this house. Daniel's jaw clenched. Why? Mom's voice broke the tension, small and brittle. Why pretend to be struggling all these years? I leaned back, savoring the moment as the truth settled over the table like fresh snow. Because, I said simply, I wanted to see who you really were, how you treated family you thought was less successful than you, and you showed me, year after year, Christmas after Christmas. Daniel's face flushed crimson. You can't just freeze our accounts, it's Christmas. Can't I? I tilted my head, meeting his furious gaze with a calm smile. Consider it a reality check. Jessica slammed her phone onto the table. This is insane, you can't do this to your own family. I rose from my chair slowly, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. Family, I said, letting the word hang in the air like an accusation. Family doesn't mock you for years. Family doesn't measure love in luxury brands. You taught me that. Mom was crying now, dabbing at her mascara-streaked cheeks with a linen napkin. Lena, please. I walked toward the grand windows overlooking the desert sunset, the last light catching the glitter of ornaments on the towering Christmas tree. My phone buzzed again, a notification, confirming the account freezes were complete. Merry Christmas, I said without turning back. Enjoy the things money can't buy. Behind me, chaos erupted. Chairs scraping, voices rising, panic setting in. But I didn't stay to watch the empire of illusions crumble. I'd already seen enough. Tonight, the power shifted, and for the first time, I didn't have to hide who I was. "Check those photo albums I gave you," I said, my voice calm against the growing tension in the room. "Behind the family pictures, you'll find detailed records of every loan, every credit card, every financial obligation you have, all ultimately controlled by my company." The room went silent except for the crackle of the fireplace in Daniel's $4,200,000 Palm Beach mansion, another purchase built entirely on credit. For a moment, no one moved. Then chairs screeched against polished marble as my family lunged for the albums they had dismissed as cute, homemade gifts just moments earlier. Jessica tore open the leather cover first. Loose pages slid out like a deck of cards, scattering across the glossy floor. Her perfectly manicured hands shook as she picked one up. "This is a joke," she declared, but her voice trembled. "You're just trying to scare us." I smiled slightly and pressed another button on my phone. Instantly, every screen in the room, the curved 85-inch in the living area, the 2 in the bar, even the smart display in the kitchen, lit up with Horizon Capital's logo and a live video feed of our trading floor in New York. "Does this look like a joke?" I asked, stepping closer to the glowing screens. "While you were all mocking my so-called modest lifestyle, I was building one of the most powerful private equity firms in the country. Every single credit card decline you just received," I held up my phone, "authorized directly by my office." Jessica's face drained of color. Daniel tried to speak, but stopped when his phone lit up again with another alert. "But the trust fund," my mother stammered, her voice weak, almost pleading. "Your portion of the family trust is what I used to seed Horizon," I finished for her, my tone cool and deliberate. "That tiny inheritance you all assumed I was barely scraping by on? I turned it into a multi-billion-dollar empire, while you were busy competing over handbags and vacation homes." Daniel was now frantically stabbing at his phone screen, his fingers trembling. "I'm calling Richardson at Premier Credit," he muttered. "He'll sort this out." I raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "Richardson? You mean Thomas Richardson?" I tapped my tablet, pulling up a personnel file. "He was promoted to Executive Vice President of Horizon Financial last month. Would you like me to connect you to his office?" Jessica dropped her phone with a sharp clatter. The only sound after that was the soft hum of the heat vents and my mother's uneven breathing. The Christmas tree lights glittered across their stunned faces, casting fractured shadows on the walls. Reality was settling in now, cold and sharp. Every financial lifeline they thought they had, mortgages, car loans, credit cards, business lines, all of it led back to me. Jessica broke the silence with a strangled whisper. "The Aspen Chalet," she said suddenly, "the one we just put a deposit on, was listed by a real estate group owned by Horizon," I said smoothly, pulling up the digital contract on my tablet. "Interesting choice, by the way, considering you're already overextended on this house." My mother had started crying quietly now, dabbing her tears with a linen napkin. "Maria, honey," she whispered, "we didn't know." "That's exactly the point, isn't it?" I said, rising to my feet. I smoothed the front of my thrift store sweater, which probably cost less than one of Jessica's cocktail rings, but the irony wasn't lost on me. "You never bothered to know. You were too busy judging, too busy flaunting wealth you didn't actually own." Daniel's voice cracked as he asked, "What do you want? Money? A public apology?" I shook my head slowly. "What I want is for you to understand something fundamental about wealth and worth." My gaze swept the glittering room, landing on each stunned face in turn. Real success doesn't need to be broadcasted. Real power doesn't need to be flaunted. I pressed another button on my phone. One by one, soft pings echoed around the table as their cards reactivated. "I'm not going to destroy you financially," I said, slipping the phone back into my bag. "That would be too easy." The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was something heavier. For the first time in years, they were truly seeing me. and that was worth more than anything they could ever buy. "Check those photo albums I gave you," I said, my voice steady in the silence that gripped the room. "Behind the family pictures, you'll find detailed records of every loan, every credit card, every financial obligation you have, all ultimately controlled by my company." Chairs scraped back against the polished marble as everyone scrambled for the albums they had dismissed moments ago as cute, homemade gifts. Jessica tore hers open first, her manicured hands trembling as loose pages spilled across the floor like snow. "This is a joke," Jessica snapped, but her voice cracked halfway through. "You're just trying to scare us." I smiled faintly and pressed another button on my phone. Every screen in Daniel's mansion, the 85-inch TV, the kitchen display, even the sound system panel, flared to life. Horizon Capital's logo filled the screens, followed by a live feed of our New York trading floor. "Does this look like a joke?" I asked softly, the glow painting the room in cold light. "While you mocked my so-called simple lifestyle, I built one of the most powerful private equity firms in the country. Every card decline you just experienced?" I lifted my phone. "Authorized by my office." Jessica's face drained of color. Daniel's jaw twitched as he stared at the pages in his hands. "Light? The family trust," my mother said finally, her voice fragile, "is what I used to seed Horizon," I cut in. "That tiny slice of money you thought I was living on? I turned it into a multi-billion-dollar empire while you maxed out credit cards." Daniel's knuckles whitened around his phone. "I'm calling Richardson at Premier Credit," he muttered. "Richardson? You mean Thomas Richardson?" I tapped my tablet. "He's now Executive VP of Horizon Financial. Want me to connect you?" The room froze. The soft jingle of the Christmas playlist sounded almost mocking. Tree lights flickered across their stunned faces. Jessica whispered, "The Aspen Chalet, the one we just put a deposit on." "Listed by a firm owned by Horizon," I replied, pulling up the contract. "Interesting choice considering you're already overextended on this house." Mom started crying quietly, mascara streaking. "Lena, honey, we didn't know." "That's the point," I said, standing. I smoothed my gray cashmere sweater, simple yet more powerful than Jessica's sequins. "You never cared to know. Too busy judging, too busy flaunting wealth you didn't own." Daniel slammed his phone down. "What do you want? Money? An apology?" I shook my head. "What I want is for you to understand something about wealth and worth." My voice dropped to a whisper, carrying like a command. "Real success doesn't need to be broadcasted. Real power doesn't need to be flaunted." I pressed one last button. Soft pings echoed as their cards reactivated. "I'm not going to ruin you financially," I said, slipping my phone into my clutch. "That would be far too easy." I turned toward the glass doors, the desert night glittering beyond. "Merry Christmas," I said, heels clicking as chaos erupted behind me. For the first time in years, they weren't laughing. They were listening. And that was worth everything. I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me if you think I made the right call. If you've ever been underestimated, share your story below. Let's support each other in proving that quiet strength always wins. My advice? Never let other people define your worth. Build in silence, stay focused, and let your success speak louder than their doubts. Remember, real power isn't about showing off. It's about being unshakable when no one sees you coming. Now tell me, what's your definition of true success?